In this Outer Worlds 2 guide, we're going to be taking a look at character creation, and I'm going to be giving you guys some tips on some things during character creation that should be useful to you from my experience of having played through the game over the last couple weeks. Something that's really important to know in the Outer Worlds 2 is that what you do in your character is permanent. So if you pick a trait or skill or assign a skill point or a perk into something and you regret it later, unfortunately, there's no way to do it short of reloading a previous save and then not selecting that. So it's really important that you get these things right. So keep that in mind when we go through this video. So the first thing we're going to take a look at for character creation is your background. There are 6 backgrounds to choose from, and these more or less impact dialogue throughout the game. These will give you dialogue options you wouldn't otherwise have, and they will show up with quite regularity, in my opinion, from what I've seen through the game. And you should select the one that you feel you're going to want to play like in the game. So, for instance, if you pick Lawbringer, that's going to give you dialogue options that like a police officer or somebody who wants to enforce the law would say. So maybe somebody says something to you and you're like, okay, but this is the law. That's the kind of mentality you'll have if you pick Lawbringer. You obviously don't have to choose that option. You're still free to pick other dialogue options that are present. So it doesn't mean just because you choose Lawbringer that you have to select it every time it's available. But just to give you some idea, if you know that you don't like playing a law type character, then obviously Lawbringer is not something you'd want to pick. Professor is not a bad idea if you know that you're going to be doing like a lot of technical dialogue and you want to sound smart in dialogues. Professor is a good way to go. There are ones that like Professor or maybe even Renegade or Gambler that will probably give you, a wider range of things to say in dialogue rather than like Lawbringer XCOM, which are going to be more like, enforcing the law or not enforcing the law, respectively. So after selecting your background, you're going to get to select your trait, and you can actually select 2 traits if you take a negative trait as well. We'll get into why you might want to do that in a second, but let's go through the traits first. So the first one, Brawny, makes it so that you're able to perform great feats of strength, and in combat, you're an unstoppable force. This allows you to knock enemies down by sliding or sprinting into them. You won't do this in combat unless you're playing a melee character, so Brawny is one you might select on a melee character. It also allows you to open some doors that would otherwise require like engineering or something like that in order to repair them without needing to do that. So there is a case for that, but I think the biggest reason you would take this is if you're planning to play a melee character. And even if you're playing a melee character, you don't really need to slide or sprint into enemies to knock them down that much, but knockdown enemies prevent you from taking damage from them, so that can be a great way to prevent damage. Definitely one worth considering if you know you're going to play melee. If you know you're not going to play melee, not one for you probably. Next is Brilliant. This makes it so that you will have dialogue options that allow you to get favorable outcomes in my experience. I've used Brilliant a lot in dialogue to get outcomes I want, so it's really good for dialogue. And it also allows you to specialize in an additional skill. We'll get into the skills in a minute. You can usually just specialize in 2. This will allow you to specialize in 3, and those will begin the game at 2 points. So this one can be really, really good for you if you want like kind of a head start in terms of skill points and dialogue options. It's one that I would highly recommend, and I think it's one of the better traits to choose. The heroic trait makes it so others tend to naturally follow and look up to you. I didn't have this trait in my playthrough, so I don't know how it impacts dialogue, but I would imagine it gives you opportunities to get people to help you out more easily, especially if they are like of a, good nature, honorable type of character. And the 20% companion ability charge time is actually really strong in my opinion. There is ways in this game you can speed up companion ability charge time besides this, so you don't necessarily have to take it as one of your traits. But I find that your companions, even on normal difficulty, will die a lot in combat, and using their abilities usually prevents them from dying. So the more you can spam their abilities, the more they tend to stay alive and help you out. So this is not necessarily a bad one to have if you know you're going to be playing with companions, which I think most people are. So next is Innovative. This makes it so that you can come up with clever ways to solve problems. I don't have this one, but I have Brilliant. I imagine it works very, very similarly, giving you dialogue options that you wouldn't have that'll get you out of jams or help you solve problems people are having, giving you an opportunity maybe if you don't meet the requirements, maybe like you don't have the speech or the science or whatever they're requiring for their problem. This might be a way to still solve that problem without having that, so that's great. And even more importantly, it makes it so crafting ammo and throwables and resources create twice as many of the items that from the same amount of crafting materials. You tend to have a shortage of ammo in this game from my experience. I'm always ammo hungry when I'm playing this game, so being able to make twice as much ammo every time you craft can really solve your ammo problem, because a lot of the times you don't have enough crafting material in order to make as much ammo as you need. You can buy ammo if you want to spend your bits on it. That's not a problem, and I'll talk about that in a later video, probably the beginner guide. But the fact that you can just create more ammo out of the resources you have is very, very valuable and will save you, the headache of constantly feeling like you're running out of ammo. The next trait is Lucky. This gives you 5% critical chance, which is just nice for any character. And then it makes it so certain opportunities are accessible to you. I don't know what these all are, but generally when I play games like this, like Fallout and stuff like that, I tend to take traits and perks like this when I see them, simply because it usually creates some opportunities in the game that are really fun that you would totally miss out on. And also it can usually get you out of some bad situations. So it's definitely one I would recommend if you're not sure what to get. It could just fill that gap for you. Nimble increases your crouch speed by 25% and your combat sprint speed by 25%. This is simply just good for any melee character, whether you're playing like a stealth assassin type character, or you want to like sneak up to something and kill it in one hit, or if you want to sprint into them and melee them really quickly. So it's good on a melee character. It could also be good on like a stealth sniper build or a ranged stealth build, allowing you to, move from position to position quickly and crouch and move as needed to get back into a better position where you're not seen. Resilient makes it so that one death is prevented for 3 seconds the first time you die in each combat. This is actually quite strong. It just really depends on whether you need it or not. Like, this is kind of planning for failure, and I don't like to do that a lot. But sometimes, maybe if you're playing on the hardest difficulty, this could be really, really good for you. Suave makes it so you have a 10% discount at all vendors, and your bounty must be 2 times higher than normal to be seen as an outlaw. So if, you get caught trespassing or stealing, etc., you got to do a lot more in order before, people will see you as an outlaw and attack you. The 10% discount at vendors is nice. There are other ways of getting discounts at vendors. But if you are not really planning on crafting your ammo and you want to buy it, getting like a high percentage discount at vendors can be a great way to just solve your ammo problem if crafting isn't the way you want, because you can just buy lots of it for really cheap. Witty makes it so that the reputation with any faction can never decrease below neutral, preventing any penalties that be gained from having negative reputation with any factions, such as vendor surcharges. I don't think this one is super necessary, in my opinion, unless you're going to play like a psychotic playthrough where you're going to be killing lots of people and you don't want your reputation to go way, way down with them. Otherwise, in my experience, it's not too hard to keep your reputation going up with everyone, even when you're kind of friends with everyone. There are certain actions that will, drastically impact one way or the other, but generally speaking, this isn't too hard to do anyway. And the dialogue options that Witty provides you with, I find, are not super appropriate most of the time. It will probably get you shot. So unless that's something that you're looking for, I wouldn't recommend this one. Okay, so if you do decide to select 2 of the traits, then you're going to have to select 1 of 3 negative traits to have on your character permanently. These are Abrasive, Dumb, and Sickly. Abrasive makes it so you can never get above neutral with any faction, and you won't get any positive benefits from the reputation of those vendors and from that faction, etc. This is a bad one in my opinion. I would not select this. There are, better ones to pick if you want to pick negative traits. Moving on to Dumb, this makes it so that you have to lock out 5 of the 12 skills and you can never put points into them. This sounds a lot worse than it is, but it's still one that's kind of, And the reason for that is because you don't want to spread your points around so thin that you never make any skill checks when you get later in the game, because you could make all the low-level skill checks, but now you can't meet any of the high ones because you don't have enough points in anything. But if you know exactly the type of player that you want, for instance, you're not going to melee, so you could lock out melee, or you're not going to use explosives, so you could lock out explosives. You're not going to sneak, so you could lock out sneak. That's 3 right there, and you just have to pick 2 others that you're not going to use. So this isn't that bad of a negative, but only if you know exactly how you want to play. And the last one is Sickly, and this is the one I would recommend if you don't know exactly what you're going to do, if you're going to kind of wing it and see how it goes throughout the game, like decide on the fly what you want to pick. 15% base health may seem like a lot, but it's bearable. You can manage this no problem, and the minus 15 toxicity crash threshold is not that bad in my opinion. So this is the one I would recommend if you want to get 2 positive traits, which I think you should. So definitely, in my opinion, select 2 positive traits that you like, take Sickly, or if you know exactly which skills you want ahead of time, like maybe this is a second playthrough or you've done some planning ahead of time, you watch this video, Dumb could also work for you. So moving along to skills, first is Engineering. This allows you to fix things while you're out in the landscape. This is usually doors and things that like block your way into places. Engineering is good for some dialogue as well. It also gives you damage resistance, which reduces the overall damage that you take. So this would not be bad on anybody that's going to be standing in gunfire if you're not playing as stealthy or if you're playing a melee character. Engineering is one that I could definitely recommend all around to any character, no matter like what play style you're playing. Explosive simply increases your explosive damage and also increases your damage resistance against explosives. If you're not using like grenades or explosive type weapons like a rocket launcher or something like that, which you probably won't most of the game, this is one you probably don't want to focus on. Putting like 1 point into it is not bad for unlocking some perks, but generally speaking, you don't want to specialize on it. Next up is guns, which increases your range damage and armor penetration. If you're playing on normal, you probably don't need guns. I would say it's probably good to put a couple points into guns on normal just for a couple of the perks that are really strong with just a couple points. But you don't need to keep pumping your range damage with guns throughout the game. There are interactions they use with guns too, so you can, actually solve some problems in the universe with having a high gun skill, but it's probably rarer than the other skills out there. So if you absolutely want to be a monster in combat, you could definitely take guns in terms of, if you're going to play ranged, but it's not 100% necessary on normal. I would really, really only recommend you go heavily into guns if you're going to play on the hardest difficulty. Next up is hack, and hack allows you to like open doors and bypass things that get in your way as you're trying to solve puzzles. It also increases your damage to auto mechanicals, and the damage to auto mechanicals is probably the better of the two things that it does. And this is one of the reasons as well that guns isn't super needed. Is there's a lot of other skills that increase your damage against enemy types or specific damage types, so you can still gain a lot of damage while also gaining abilities that are going to solve problems for you in the game. So you don't necessarily need guns. But hack is one that I think is really good. It's maybe not as good as like lockpick or maybe as engineering, but it's still really good, and it can help you solve some of the like annoying I can't find this key card, or maybe I need to like shuttle these mechs off because they're like attacking me constantly. So it's one that can be a nice quality of life, but it's not super necessary in terms of like unlocking things for like better loot and things like that. Next up is leadership. Leadership increases your companion damage and companion health. If you do not increase this, even when you're playing on normal, your companions will die constantly, like within the first 5 to 10 seconds of combat, usually. So I highly recommend that if that frustrates you, or you want your companions to be really, really effective because they can be really good in combat, and you like using their abilities a lot, it's a good one to take. It also has dialogue options that you can use in combat to convince people to help you and things like that. So it kind of has like a mini speech effect in terms of persuade as well. So it's one of my favorite ones overall. There is also a really good perk with 9 speech and 9 leadership that will give you lots of reputation and also make your companions' abilities charge faster. So I definitely think that if you're someone who really likes companions and you're going to rely on them a bit on combat, it's definitely worth taking, especially if you're not going to put points into like guns or something like that. Next up is a lockpick. This allows you to open doors and get the loot and whatever inside of them. This is a staple for pretty much Outer Worlds. I think everyone should probably take lockpick. The evasion chance also makes it so that you just have a passive chance to avoid ranged projectile attacks from enemies. So the higher your evasion chance, the less ranged enemies are going to affect you in combat, which is both good for melee characters and ranged characters. Predominantly ranged characters, because evasion does not apply to melee attacks. So if you're a ranged character, this can also be really good. Armor and things, and there are other ways to get evasion chance. You can push your evasion chance very, very high so that ranged enemies are, not as big of a problem with you, allowing you to focus down the melee enemies that could be charging at you and then finish off the ranged guys later. Next up is melee, increasing your melee damage and reducing the damage you receive while blocking. I don't tend to block in the Outer Worlds when playing melee, but the melee damage is great. There are a lot of really strong melee weapons in this game, so obviously if you plan to play a melee build, this is a no-brainer. Next up is medical. This increases your toxicity crash threshold and increases the damage you do to creatures. Your toxicity crash threshold will determine like how much you can heal yourself with your inhaler before you crash and have a bunch of negative effects from that. So this can allow you to use your inhaler more, which is nice if you need it. It's not super great. The real benefit of medical is 2 things. The damage to creatures. These are like the, aliens and things you're going to find out in the world, which is a lot of the enemies in the game. It's a good amount of them. It's probably like a third of the enemy type in the game. So getting that passive damage is great. And also you can solve a lot of problems in the game world with medical and give you favor results. You can save people's lives. You can get more healing items. So medical is just really, really strong, and it shows up in a lot of dialogue choices as well. Next is observation. This allows you to find hidden objects if you have like a high enough uh, level of observation. It kind of reminds me of like perception or something from D&D, something like that. Also increases your weak spot damage. So if you hit an enemy like in its weak spot or a human in the head or whatever, you're going to get more damage when you do that. So this is really good if you're doing like some sort of precision ranged build, or like, you're sniping, or, maybe you're using tactical time dilation with a pistol, that like a revolver, and you're trying to like kill things in like one shot or two shots. That can be really good for that. So if you're playing any sort of sniper build, this is good. The observation part for the hidden objects, I don't know how many hidden objects there are in the game, but there is a character you can get that helps you with this. So you don't necessarily need it for that. But again, if you're playing a sniper, this one's probably one you must have. So moving on to science, this increases your gadget energy meter so that you can use your gadgets more often, which is really nice because there's some great gadgets in this game. And it does have a lot of place in dialogues. Like there are a lot of dialogue options with science and interactions with science as well. It also makes it so that you gain 10% more stacks of non-physical damage type side effects, so like burn or corrosive or shock. So if you're not using like physical damage and you're using like weapons that are like plasma or corrode or whatever, then, and you plan on using those type of weapons, then this is really, really good to have. So that's definitely one I would recommend if you use your gadgets a lot and you rely on them, or you plan on using like, status effects. You're going for some sort of status effect build. Next up is sneak. This increases your sneak attack damage, no surprise there, and also makes it so that NPC awareness detection rate is slower, so it takes them longer to find you or to realize that you're there. Obviously, this is for any sort of stealth build, whether you're playing a ranged stealth build or a melee stealth build. This is good for you. So if you plan on playing stealth, going to take sneak. It's a no-brainer. And lastly is speech. This allows you to get favorable dialogue options, like things that you want, like particularly convincing people to not do terrible things. If you're playing the Outer Worlds or one of these games, typically almost everyone rolls speech simply because it gives you the option to get out of a bad situation if you want. That doesn't mean like you can't, just pull your gun out and shoot the person because you feel like they're a dickhead and deserve it or whatever. But at least you have the option to get out of a violent encounter if you want. And the other really nice thing about speech is that it increases your damage to humans for each point that you have. So when you're facing human enemies, which is quite frequent in this game, you're going to deal more damage when you're fighting them as well. So it's kind of win-win. You can get out of fighting enemies if you want, but you can also deal more damage when you're fighting them if you need. Definitely recommend speech on just about every build. So the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to put some example starting setups for like what skills I would recommend for different archetypes on the screen so you can see them. You don't have to follow these exactly, but just to give you kind of a starting point on what I would do if I was planning on playing certain ways, we can show that here. And also keep in mind, we do have a beginner guide for this with like just beginner tips, things you should do so you don't miss certain things or things you should pick up quickly in the game. And I do have a best perks video as well, talking about the perks of the game, like which ones you should definitely look out for. And we will have some builds for this as well, so stay tuned for those.